Could Germany have won World War II, and what would have happened if it did? This is, I think, probably the biggest of the alternative history questions. Um, Specifically, could Germany have won? How could they have won? And if they did, how would the world look different? And I think it's fascinating because A, we just have so much more information about World War II than we do about most wars in history. It really was, at least in terms of the popular imagination, a war that had a lot more going on than just conflict. There was an ideological dimension to it. Like, there's a thought that maybe if Germany and the Axis powers had won, then fascism would have kind of become the default or de facto political ideology, supplanting liberal democracy. You could have had the collapse of the Soviet Union, and then you wouldn't have had international communism. The world would look very, very different from how it is today. It's interesting if you look at what are some of kind of the more popular how Nazi Germany could have won World War II things. We have something like Hitler shouldn't have invaded Russia, or Hitler should have listened to his generals and gone after Moscow, and if they had have taken Moscow, things would have worked out. Or what about like if some of their like the secret weapons of the Third Reich had worked? Like, could that have happened? Like, there's a bunch of stuff just like that. That's kind of the focus of how they could have won World War II. I guess another one would be Operation Sea Lion. I don't know if any of these things really matter that much. I don't know if any of these things would have been possible. Like, I doubt that even if they had just decided to do Operation Sea Lion, they could have done anything. Because they would have had to, I don't think they had the transport ships, so they would have had to just put a bunch of guys in like some ships and then go to the UK and get past the Royal Navy and the RAF and then land and face the British Army, probably without any heavy equipment and no supply lines, while being attacked by the RAF, the Royal Navy, and the British Army. Like, it's kind of fun to like meme about and to think of, but I don't think it's really a practical way that they could have won the war. Likewise, you have all the like the super tanks and stuff, and none of that was also practical. The thing though that I think is the most interesting is this idea that if only Hitler had listened to his generals on the Eastern Front, they would have won. And I think it's interesting because to a large extent people are kind of falling into the same trap that said generals did. Well, they're falling into the exact same trap because they're the ones they're listening to, which is to look at warfare as more of a tactical level. That is, winning the war is about how many people you kill, how many individual battles you win. The big picture is not really important. What's important is you win battles and the casualty figures look really good on the sheet. I think is kind of the perspective a lot of the German general staff had, as well as prestige. Oh, we need to capture Moscow, or we need to capture something like that, just to make, because of the prestige of it and the importance as a symbol. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, this is kind of turned around on Hitler with regards to Stalingrad, which is viewed as a vanity project that he wanted to capture because it has Stalin's name in it. And the whole thing is a lot more complicated than that. But let's just take a look at this. So, if Germany had have taken Moscow, would it have mattered? It was a big transportation hub. Russia was a very centralized country. Even if Stalin left and most of the leadership left, it would have caused immense administrative disruption. Trying to reset up all the ministries again would have been a nightmare. Who knows if they would have been able to just move like all the documents and stuff they need to run the government. It would have been a mess. But I don't think it would have ended the war. I think the Soviet Union was going to continue to fight on as long as it could, and it would have been very devastating. But the issue is it doesn't really address what the fundamental reason that Germany lost World War II was, which is oil. Germany didn't really run out of manpower, at least not really till the end of the war. They didn't really run out of things like tanks or really aircraft, if you think about it. I think they stopped producing as much aircraft, but that wasn't really because they couldn't. It was because they had no fuel to fly any of it. And if you notice, the Luftwaffe just became completely useless as the war went on. That wasn't even so much Goering's incompetence or the inability of the Germans to make good airplanes. It's just aircraft take a lot of fuel, in particular very high octane fuel, and Germany just didn't have any. They kept making new tanks throughout the war. They made a lot of Panzer IVs. I think the number of Panzer IVs increased every year, but they weren't that useful because they didn't have any gas to run them. And I think it's something very hard, kind of these dinner table issues to think about. To think, okay, well, you have all these tanks, they're building the tanks, but they that you practically can't use them. We have this like the Germans, and they're going to go with their blitzkrieg. And the thing is, they couldn't do that, at least not post 1941, because they were just basically out of oil, and they were just kind of barely chugging along at that point in time. So taking Moscow would hurt Russia, yes, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem where they just have no oil. Now they have the Romanian oil fields, but there's still a huge just deficit that they're unable to make up. Meanwhile, you have the British and later the Americans who are starting to do some real damage to the synthetic oil production, and the situation just kind of gets worse and worse and worse. So that being said, how could they have won? Did they actually stand a chance of winning? Because a common theory is, oh, Hitler was stupid to invade Russia. He's like Napoleon. That never would have worked out. Why was he trying to attack the Caucasus? They should have gone north and not south. So let's just take a step back here once again for a minute. Now, the Caucasus, the mountains there, they don't seem as glamorous as the domes of the Kremlin or St. Basil's Church or whatever. But there is something there that's very important, and that is oil. I think it was something like 85 to 90% of the Soviet Union's oil came from the Caucasus, specifically Baku being the largest, but also Mayakop and Grozny. So that's where most of their oil came from. Also, most of the Soviet Union's food came from the Ukraine. So if you look at what Hitler's invasion plan was, it was, okay, the two goals are, A, we're going to take the Ukraine and we're going to take all the food production, and B, we're going to take the Caucasus and we're going to take the oil. Now, once again, people have kind of attacked Hitler and said he was stupid because of this. Said he was stupid for doing this because they were never going to get the oil out. They're like, oh, they're expecting to just export all the oil from here back to Germany or wherever and refine it. Well, that would have been nice, but that was kind of like icing on the cake. It didn't really matter to a certain extent. If we look at what they were trying to achieve in 1942, which they might have been able to achieve in 41 or in 42, but the general staff thought that Hitler was a crazy madman, and so they were like, no, we have to go attack Moscow. We can't go down here. And they kind of deliberately undermined his efforts. Let's just look at this for a minute. Okay, so we have the three main oil centers, Grozny, Mayakop, and Baku, which is down here. If they Baku's a long ways away. It's going to be very difficult for them to take it. But if they had have just closed this little bit here, the Soviets have no way of shipping their oil from Baku to the rest of the Soviet Union, except by sea. And that's where Stalingrad comes in. Stalingrad is the key to the Volga River. It straddles the Volga River. If they had have taken Stalingrad and here, then the Soviet Union has no way of getting their oil out. I guess they can get it out on the east side of the Caspian, but that's a logistical nightmare. So that would basically, if they had have gotten a little further there and a little further there, they would have cut off something like 85 to 90% of the Soviet Union's oil supplies. I don't know how many reserves they had in the rest of the country, but given what a large-scale war they were fighting, even with as much as they were producing, I'm sure they were burning through the gas like there's no tomorrow. And keep in mind, oil isn't only used to power tanks and aircraft. Things like tractors, trucks that carry things like food and ammunition and medicine. And there's a lot of synthetic things that you need oil to make, like plastic and that kind of thing. And the Soviets would have had to try to do everything they were doing prior to that, if Blau had succeeded, with 90% less oil, which is just, you can't function that way. The Germans could barely function, and they were getting something like 60% of what they needed for a bare minimum of functionality, and it ultimately cost them the war. So who knows how long the Soviets would have even been able to keep it up. So I think what Hitler's plan was okay, we're going to take Ukraine, we're going to take the oil region, and we're just going to hold it. And it doesn't matter what the cost is, and because people were like, oh, the don't fall back thing. Hitler was stupid. He didn't want to shorten the line. He didn't want to improve his logistics. They're overstretched. Yeah, they're overstretched, but they're blocking off the Soviet Union's like two most important resource regions. So it's not dumb like people think, because the idea was, okay, we've got that, and from my understanding, oil production was actually getting affected. It just didn't go far enough. But by 1943, I think the Soviet economy, from what we know, was on the verge of complete and utter implosion. Starvation was becoming rampant. I don't think fuel shortages were that big a deal, but from my understanding, in a lot of cases, the country was becoming, they were kind of, one of the only reasons they survived was because of land lease from the United States. The Americans started bringing in large amounts of food to try to kind of prop up how bad the situation was getting. Because, I mean, keep in mind, the Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, and all of it, and like the rest of like European Russia, probably, I'm not sure how much is grown in Belarus, I would imagine a lot, is under control of the Germans. So the longer the war goes on and the longer they hold this, the more starved the Soviets get. And once again, you don't even have to get to the point where the entire population dies of starvation. Once you start getting people on like 1,000 calories a day, they start to get weak. They can't think properly. They can't function properly. The Soviet army, men need a lot of calories when they're going into combat, particularly in the winter. And if they're not getting that because they have to ration so heavily, then that's going to be a big problem. And it was becoming a big problem. However, they didn't manage to take Stalingrad. They didn't manage to reach the sea and completely cut off the Caucasus. Now, this is where I kind of see, this is the question of, could Germany have won if something had have changed? If in 1940, the Germans had focused everything on the south and maybe made it to Stalingrad, or at least made it further, and then focused everything on the next offensive and captured this area, could they have won? Maybe. It's definitely a possibility. I'm going to have a stream with Serp about this sometime in the very near future, and he states his thought was, okay, if that had have happened, the Soviet Union would have collapsed as a state, but it would have still remained a belligerent power, and it would be a situation kind of like what Japan faced in China, where it would be impossible for them to totally knock them out of the war and make them come to the peace table, but they would cease to be the kind of industrial and military juggernaut they were in our timeline. So then that kind of brings us to the question of, okay, so if they beat the Soviet Union and they get the oil and they get the Ukraine and they manage to, the question is, can the British and Americans and other allies invade before the clock runs out and Germany starts to get those resources again? Also, presumably, if the Soviets aren't as big a deal as they were in our timeline, the Germans are going to have a lot more tanks and men to send to fortify the Atlantic Wall. And obviously, America has a huge population, has a huge industrial juggernaut they could just ramp up. They could just increase the draft and build more tanks and stuff. If they want to go to Europe, they can go to Europe and whatever forces they want, but it would be a lot more difficult. The other issue is if the Germans got an adequate amount of oil, they might start being able to rebuild the Luftwaffe. A big issue is not just so much they couldn't fly the planes, but they couldn't train pilots. If they started to be getting like significantly more oil, they could just start working on developing an entirely new air corps. The civilian economy would start to work better again. Their men would start to become better fed. A lot of things would just start to function properly. And you go from a situation under which Germany is continually getting weaker because it's running out of natural resources to a situation where Germany is continually getting stronger. So then you get into kind of a production race with America versus Germany. You get into a question of whether or not they are going to attempt to launch an invasion. Also, if the British would have stayed in the war past that point, because they kind of, if they had have taken the Caucasus oil, they would have failed kind of, well, they would have succeeded their side of it, but Germany would have gotten the oil. And kind of the whole point of Britain staying in was to prevent them from getting oil from Venezuela or Mexico or America back when it was a neutral country. So we're actually looking at a case then where it becomes a very different game. And Germany doesn't suffer kind of the default loss that it did in our timeline. So I think Germany could have won, and it actually came very, very close to doing so. Now, whether or not this would have worked, I don't know. The whole thing's very complicated. But I think it's kind of naive to say that, oh no, there's no way Germany could have won. I initially kind of took that opinion that the Soviet Union was so large and powerful that it kind of didn't really matter what Germany did. They would just lose but from weight of numbers. But the numbers weren't even really the issue, at least until very late in the war. And the bigger problem was they couldn't use the numbers they had because they couldn't make their tanks run. So those are my thoughts on the matter. I hope you found that interesting. And I'll have a stream with Serp on this hopefully very soon. God bless and have a good day.